That's okay.
Okay, so hi, I'm with Alex Colianni. Alex, you're based in Boston, so I wonder if you can just give us a little bit about your background and the reason for our chat that we're going to have at this moment in time.
Yeah, no, so I'm based in Chicago. I work at the Eating Recovery Center. I'm an clinical exercise physiologist. I have my master's degree in exercise science with a specialty more on the clinical side. I mostly work with our binge eating disorder patients here in Chicago. I do a little bit with our anorexia and bulimia patients, but I mostly work with our binge eating disorder patients to try and incorporate some type of activity and or exercise, and even at times potentially restrict a little bit of that exercise and activity depending on kind of how that exercise and activity is being perceived by those particular patients.
Well, what
And so what's
particularly,
best helps them.
I came across your article, didn't I, Alex? And what
Yeah,
interested me
yeah.
was because I'm a great believer in learning outcomes from being active in what you're doing. And what interested me about your article, that you were talking about the activity being part of the remedy for people that were perhaps suffering some type of eating disorder. So I just wondered if you could give us how that actually works.
Yeah, I mean, so typically they're engaging when they come to our program. It's a therapy program, right? And so they're not coming there to exercise, they're coming there for therapy. And all we want is the activity to enhance the therapy in which they're engaging, right? Because a lot of people will say, I want to exercise and be active for my health, but we want to think, what's the number one important aspect for health a lot of times in these patients' lives right now? And it's that recovery from their eating disorder. So just about any study you look at that you have a CBT therapy group, a cognitive behavioral therapy group going on, if you have a CBT therapy group, a control group, and a CBT and exercise group, usually the group that's active and or exercising is going to be that CBT therapy is going to be enhanced, right? So they're going to get better outcomes. You know, for example, there's a few. I would love to see more research done. Not a lot of people like to research, but there have been a few articles done with regards to decreased binge urges for binge eating disorder patients that are engaging in CBT therapy groups and exercise, just compared to those that are engaging in CBT therapy.
Well,
So a lot of times you'll see a decrease in binge urges.
well, I mean, obviously, what you're looking to do is change behavior. And they reckon it takes 21 days for a habit to form. And I'm wondering, for those initial 21 days, you've got to motivate someone. Some people don't like to talk about exercise. And you had a way of getting people active and how you kept them motivated. I was interested in that.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, a lot of what I do when patients come in, I mean, we'll engage in activity and exercise, but for me, I walk into a room with most of my patients, and again, they're in what we call the pre-contemplative state of change with regards to activity. They're not even considering exercise and or activity. So when I walk into a room, a lot of times it's, I hate exercise, I hate activity, it's awful, it's terrible, I don't want to have anything to do with it. And so I kind of have to walk in and say, okay, introduce myself as an exercise physiologist and kind of get them hopefully to look at that activity and exercise through a different lens. And I take more of a scientific approach with regards to explaining, what do we mean when we say activity? What do we mean when we say exercise? I'll talk to patients a lot of times. I hate exercise, it's awful and terrible. And I'll talk to them a little bit and I find out that they enjoy getting into a pool, they like swimming. And I'll say, well, why isn't that a modality of activity? Why isn't that a modality of exercise? And they'll say, well, I enjoy it. So they review this term exercise. It's only painful, awful, and terrible. I've only had negative experiences with this in the past. And so trying to get them to say, okay, you don't have to get on a treadmill every single time if you hate getting on a treadmill. Let's find other modalities of activity and, you know, a different way to perceive what we mean this to be with regards to activity.
That's great. So getting movement from somebody is understanding how they enjoy what they're doing, or a discovery as to what they enjoy. Because you're right, I think if we enjoy something, we've got the ability to store it longer than our long-term memory, because we've got greater emotions by just from the enjoyment from doing it. So we make this relationship between the activity or the movement and the enjoyment that we're experiencing. So that seems to be very crucial to the success of the treatment.
The other thing too to keep in mind, and this is very common for patients that I work with and even outside, the most common reason people quit activity and or exercise, typically the first 2 weeks up until 6 months into a routine, is they do too much too soon. They play with too many variables, and those variables are very specifically defined as frequency of how often we're doing the activity, duration of how long it is, and then intensity. They usually just do a little, then usually that leads to either we'll stop and quit and or injure ourselves from that activity, right? We're just slightly overreaching or overtraining. So a lot of people want exponential progress. The problem with exponential progress is there's usually a fall off point. Linear progress, but also getting to something that's maintainable and sustainable for us is the ultimate goal to any type of activity routine. And so again, my patients are, I'd say, more on the extreme end of this, but they have this, and this is stealing the therapist terms that I work with, but it's this all or nothing thinking. I'm either doing this 5, 6, 7 days a week for an extended period of time, or I'm not doing it at all. And so me trying to take more of a scientific approach of saying, well, no, there's what we call a dose response relationship to the health benefits we gain from being active in the amount of activity that we're engaging in, which is just a fancy way of saying of doing something's always going to be better than doing nothing. We're still getting a benefit. I mean, you know, there were new national activity guidelines here in America in 2018, and they said even 3 to 5 minutes of activity is shown to be beneficial from a physiological standpoint. So it's really avoiding those long stretches of time where we're seated for 2, 4, 8, 10 hours at a time. And so even getting up for 3 to 5 minutes and breaking up the day that way can make a huge difference. And again, that's more from an activity standpoint, because activity is just a broad term that means anything besides being seated and at rest, anything. Exercise is a subcategory of activity that's usually structured, it's pre-planned, it's typically a goal in mind. It's measurable if we want it to be measurable. So something like resistance training or a cardiovascular routine would be more structured exercise. Even physical therapy would be considered rehabilitative structured exercise. So it's really finding what types of activity that they're going to want to engage in.
What sorts of point do you normally look at someone and expect a sort of turnaround in their condition? Do you measure that by time, or just with the conversation or the discussion that you're having?
My goal with patients, I want to get them more, again, a lot of the patients are so sedentary when they come to me. A good way to perceive it, because there's a definition for sedentary, but I kind of think there should be another one for a lot of the patients I get. I call them, it's not all of them, but some of them will be what I call shut-ins. I mean, maybe a lot of the patients I work with have severe depressive episodes. Maybe they're coming from inpatient, severe anxiety, debilitating anxiety, you know, bipolar disorders, you know, borderline personality disorders. And so when they're coming in, sometimes I've had patients, and it's not uncommon, where they don't realize they need a walker because they're at home so much that they just are grabbing on. They don't realize they're a fall. They don't realize they're a fall risk. Like they come in to our facility, and because the facility I work at is 24/7, and they stay there, and it's like, oh, this person's at risk of falling. What have they been doing at home? Again, it's just because they're that sedentary. They don't even perceive that they need something like a walker. So for me, it's getting them to say, okay, yeah, we can engage in structured exercise, but you just being here, walking around the building, your activity levels went up exponentially. Your body needs to adapt to that. And we can incorporate types of exercise, but we don't want to do too much, because then it's going to cause you, it's going to be too much too soon. And that's when it's going to cause you to quit and or injure yourself. And again, I also get the opposite end of the spectrum. So I kind of get the opposite end. So I get people that are
constant coaching though, isn't it? Because you need to be aware where that tipping point is constantly all the time. And I suppose that can only come through discussion and reflection and what you're hearing from the actual patients themselves.
Exactly. I mean, exercise should always be individualized. Activity should always be individualized, but absolutely. But I do get the opposite end of the spectrum. And this is something I never would have thought of going through grad school. I've had to restrict exercise from some patients that come in. It's not as common, but I'll get patients that come in are more on the compulsive exercise, is more the psychological term. In my field of exercise science, what's called overreaching, overtraining. And so they're engaging in too much activity and or exercise. And so it's kind of, hey, we might need to restrict for a few days and see, how do we respond to that? Are we able to cope? This is interesting from a mental health standpoint, because I usually say a good consequence of being active is it can help regulate our mood. But for me, and it depends on the person, but for me, the only goal or expectation that some individual will have, if it's only to feel better due to the exercise, I think that can potentially lead to being compulsive, like compulsively exercising. And what does that mean? Again, for a lot of my patients, maybe they come in and the only tool in my toolbox to help regulate my mood is some type of activity or exercise. And usually when someone's saying that, not always, but usually they don't mean a 5 or 10 minute stretching routine. They usually mean some type of moderate to vigorous intensity cardiovascular exercise and or resistance training. That's great. We can't do that every day. We can't. Every time I have a bad day at work, every time I'm sad, upset, anxious, worried, angry, I can't go do sprints.
Do you think that's experience, Alex? Because I think as we get older, the more we do something, the more we familiarize ourselves. Of course, we're not using as much energy the second or third time we do something, because it's not something new that we're experiencing for the first time. We've learned that we're not expanding as much energy as worry, maybe just concern, can I actually do this? We're using less energy as we move and become more experienced with it. But of course, one of the things that I would like to talk about was when you're talking about this mood change in mental health, because I think that's a real important point, particularly when you think there's so much medication now to change people's mood, and when you can do it just through sport or activity or by movement, but you have none of the downsides that you associate with drugs in itself.
Yeah, I mean, yes, I think it could be a good supplementary activity. Again, I'm not a doctor, so I wouldn't say stop taking your meds and just exercise. But it definitely should be a piece of the puzzle. At any type of mental health facility, or anybody that has mental health issues should be trying to engage in some type of structured activity or exercise. I think it can be a really helpful supplementary like treatment for sure. But again, if the only way we have is like moderate to vigorous exercise, that's where it can potentially be problematic. Again, it depends on the person, because like you're saying, with experience, I can adapt and I figure what I can do, what I can't do. Yes, a lot of people can. A lot of people can't, though. You know, the patients I work with, if I'm not always able to run that 6-minute mile, I'm not doing it, right? If I'm not. So, and again, I know my population is a little bit more extreme at times, but I do see patients a lot of times where you have to be that specific. I remember I was giving a talk to some of our anorexia and bulimia patients, and they kept saying, they're like, how do you know when it's too much? And, you know, I'm kind of going through like these, you know, terminology and talking about definitions of what I mean by this. And they're like, no, but physically, what do you experience when you know it's too much? And I thought it went without being said, but I'm like, oh, you should never be symptomatic when you exercise during or after, meaning you shouldn't be dizzy, lightheaded, fainting. You shouldn't be throwing up. Shouldn't happen. I thought that went without being said, but they all looked at me like, oh my gosh, no one's ever told me that before. And it's like, oh, wow. So it sounds like, oh, goes without being said. But for a lot of people, I think more maybe than you think. Not necessarily. Right?
No, I agree with you on that. I think that's absolutely true. I've experienced all those things. Having trained in sports and I've felt sick after a session and things like that. You know, but I think also by doing activity, by being involved in movement, it's learning. You learn to listen to your body. I think as I've got older now, I'm more attuned with the ability to be able to listen to what I can do, because I realize, you know, I'm not 25. Like, I'm not going to perform like a 25-year-old anymore.
Right.
You know? And you have to come to terms with that, you know. But it doesn't mean that at the same time that I don't test myself or push myself.
No, that's not what I'm saying. Yeah. That's not what I'm saying at all either. It's just being able to not allow, if I'm not able to meet a certain expectation that I set for myself, which might even be, I mean, certain expectations and goals. It's like, oh, if I don't run this 6-minute mile like I used to, because I'm comparing now to my past, or even maybe people around me, it's going to cause me to stop and quit or not want to engage in that. And so it's being able to have those skills and coping skills to say, no, that's okay, right? We want to be active till the day we die. That's one extra workout or one less a week. Acutely doesn't matter, right? Life's a marathon. That's really the message I try to get across to patients. And I try to come from more of a scientific standpoint, because again, for the exercise science, I think the science supports these messages, but these messages aren't really getting portrayed, in my opinion, in as much as they should be in the fitness industry, which is where people.
I love your articles and what you've had to say, and I found them really very interesting, Alex.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
If you were to give people a few little tips with regards to how they can use activity to support their mental health, what few tips would you give people?
I would say the number one thing that is important, be able to pre-plan. I think activity and or exercise should always be pre-planned. Always. We need to be able to deviate from that plan. Just because you pre-plan something doesn't mean you chisel it into stone. We need to be able to, so meaning, for example, hey, I'm planning to do a resistance training routine tomorrow, but my friend called me today and wanted to go on a hike. Well, I can't go on that hike now because I need to do that. I'll be too sore to do the resistance training. It's like, no, we have a plan, but we need to be able to deviate from that. Go on that hike, engage in that activity, and either decrease the volume of what you're going to do tomorrow or do it the following day, and be able to deviate from that. And again, it sounds self-perceived and we should know that already, but a lot of people have trouble with that. Because also, if our activity and exercise is purely based off our mood, depends on how we're feeling that day. It depends on our mood. I don't know what I'm going to engage in today because it's mood dependent. If I'm in a good mood, maybe I'm not going to engage in it because I'm only using exercise to regulate my mood, right? So it's only when I have it's my only tool in my toolbox. So if I'm having a bad day, that's when I engage in it to help, deal with my anxiety. And if I'm not that anxious that day, why engage in it at all? Right? Or vice versa. If I'm having a very difficult day, I'm not going to be able to go to the Zumba class tonight.
So don't give yourself such a hard time over this.
A little bit of self-compassion is basically.
Yeah, a bit of self-love on those situations. I think that's great advice.
But pre-plan is vital in my opinion. That's usually one of the big questions I ask patients. I don't know if I'm engaging in compulsive exercise. It's like, well, is it all purely dependent on your mood, whether you engage in it or not? Are you able to pre-plan, and also are you able to deviate from that plan if you need to? Because again, we're not exercising for increasing your performance in a sport, whether you're a high-level amateur or professional, is a completely different mentality than doing it for general health and well-being. For me, some of the hardest patients to work with, honestly, are former athletes, especially high-level amateur or professional. They've only engaged in activity with the sole purpose of increasing their performance in that sport. As a strength and conditioning coach, I don't necessarily care about your health other than if you're in bad health, it's going to negatively affect your performance. It's about increasing your performance in that sport. If we're engaging in it for general health and well-being, it's a different mentality to engage in that.
Absolutely.
And I'm sure, you can relate.
I can a lot. Like I almost feel quite guilty, as if I should apologize. But some great points there, Alex. And I'm aware of the sort of time. But if people wanted to read any of your articles or go to your website, where would they go?
So I have my LinkedIn. So Alex Colianni on LinkedIn. I haven't put too many articles out. I mean, I have a few that I've written, but I haven't put out yet. And they kind of goes through this path of really, we want to ask ourselves before we engage in that activity, what's the purpose? What's the intentions? What's the goal, if anything at all? Because we don't want to, even sometimes subconscious goal or expectation to be a barrier for continuing to be active after 2 months of doing a certain activity. I expected a certain look. I expected a certain amount of weight loss. I expected a certain, whatever the expectation might be. I don't feel I'm getting what I thought I should get out of this, and now I stop and quit. We want to avoid that yo-yo type of activity or exercise. And expecting that modality of activity to change over time. I would expect and encourage that. It can even be seasonal. Here in Chicago, you might have someone who likes to garden or go on bike rides. Again, those are outdoor activities. Midwinter in Chicago, you're not going to be able to do that. So we got to, modify what that activity looks like for the winter. Maybe it's more indoor activity. Maybe it's not ideal, but it's what we're going to do for that time period. So it can even be seasonal, the activity.
I think some great points there, Alex. So Alex, on that point, I want to thank you very much for your time.
Thank you so much.
I'm going to finish this particular interview here. So thank you once again, Alex. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure talking with you.